Have you ever asked God for a neon sign? You know what I mean. You prayed, God, would you give me an answer to a question that I've got, or I have a decision I have to make and I need to know which one to choose, and you just wanted a vision from God, something that would answer those questions. Well, this sort of happens in the life of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, we find the time period about 592 to 570 BC, the beginning of the Babylonian captivity, where the Israelites have to leave their land. And as they're getting prepared for this, God shows up to Ezekiel. It says in verse 3 of chapter 1, and the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel, and the hand of God came upon him. And maybe you've wondered, what would God show us? What would God do for us if he really showed us that neon sign? Well, I believe that there are four themes in the book of Ezekiel that really give us four truths that we can anchor our hope and faith in. And the first one is the reality of the presence of God. Notice at the end of chapter 1, here's what it says in verse 28. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of his radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And God is going to remind Ezekiel through these visions that he gets, these mysterious yet majestic visions, God's omnipotence, that he is over all things. He is strong, all powerful. His omnipresence, that he's everywhere. Even as they're headed into captivity, God would still be there. They didn't need a temple. They didn't need the land. They didn't need Levitical systems. They needed God's presence. But we also see God's love for them through this. Now, the book of Ezekiel begins on a sad note, a note of despair, because we see the glory of the Lord being removed. Look at chapter uh, 8, and we see in verse 3, he stretched out the form of his hand and caught me by a lock of my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me into Jerusalem. Now listen to verse 4. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there, like the appearance which I saw in the plain. Verse 6, he said, see the abominations of Israel. Then in 9, verse 3, then the glory of the God of Israel went up. And we're going to see verse by verse through chapter 10 and 11 that the glory departs. And so the reality of God's presence, but the removal of God's glory. But a beautiful fact about Ezekiel is we see the restoration of God's people. We see this in chapter 36 with the promise that God would make a new covenant with them, take out their heart of stone and put a heart of flesh by the power of the Holy Spirit. And then we see the redemption of God's people. From chapters 40 through 48, there's a beautiful picture of future prophecy, future times where God would redeem the people. He would redeem the land. He would bring a river of life in chapter 47. He would show them the city of God in chapter 48. But ultimately, it gives us a picture of Revelation 22 where there would be no more curse. And how does this take place? Through Jesus Christ, God's Son. And so the book of Ezekiel, though it starts out in despair, it ends with a promise of hope through the Son of God, which makes Ezekiel worth reading.